Good evening and welcome to the Brighter Tomorrow Speaker Series, presented by the Adams County Children's Advocacy Center. The Speaker Series takes place monthly and highlights topics that aim to equip parents, caregivers, and community members with the tools to help keep children safe. Your questions are welcome and encouraged. Please submit questions in the comments and they will be answered at the end of the presentation. Thank you. Our speaker this evening is Justin Donofrio, Prevention Services Manager for the Pennsylvania Family Support Alliance. The PA Family Support Alliance is a statewide nonprofit organization that provides education, support, and training programs to make Pennsylvania safe for children. In his role as Prevention Services Manager, Justin serves as the leader for child abuse prevention related services and works alongside community-based organizations to build a strategic foundation of supports and services in local statewide communities. Thank you for all the work you're doing and welcome, Justin.
Thank you so much, and thank you everyone for joining us tonight. I know we're into the evening hours, but I'm really excited for this presentation and for the opportunity to talk to you all a little bit about family digital wellness and how that fits into child abuse prevention and the connection to the youth mental health crisis. So again, thank you so much for this opportunity. Hopefully while we'll cover a wide range of things, hopefully there's some good nuggets of information for everyone, whether you may be a parent or a caregiver or a professional in this field. I think this topic is very expansive and covers quite a bit of information. So hopefully everybody finds something to have as a good takeaway. As mentioned, I'm the Prevention Services Manager at the Pennsylvania Family Support Alliance. I mentioned this to make a connection from our organization as a statewide leader in child abuse prevention to the topic of family digital wellness. We'll kind of cover that whole continuum in tonight's presentation. I should just mention up front that there's so many areas that we could drill down and dive deep into both in the topic area of child abuse prevention as well as digital wellness. So this will be more high level, but please do know that we have plenty of resources that we'll mention later on where you could get more concrete, more tangible information if you're looking for that. But as a child abuse prevention organization, Pennsylvania Family Support Alliance is really committed to covering all areas where parents and caregivers need support and assistance and information to help them parent and raise children in today's world. And that's really where the premise of the Family Digital Wellness Initiative had come about. So, the question that's first asked is why family digital wellness and or why digital wellness in general. And when we launched this program about 2 years ago, going on 2 years ago, we're really starting to see an uptick in news and in media about some of the concerns of online safety, especially for children and teens. And being a parent myself and other staff at PFSA, we realized that digital environments really have become a part of both ours as adults' everyday lives as well as our children's. And that's only increasing more and more each day. What we've also recognized, both personally and in our professional roles, is that parents are trying to figure out what impact social media and digital technology has on them as young adults or as adults, while also trying to figure out what that means for parenting and parenting styles, as well as the impact it has on youth. So PFSA really examined this topic internally and kind of the intersection of the rise and increase of digital technology and some of the challenges around parenting and risk factors for abuse, and really became committed to not only addressing the issue, but really being a leader in the area of strengthening families and parents and caregivers in particular through a digital wellness approach. And so that's really where the Family Digital Wellness Program and initiative at PFSA came about. And since then, we've really taken off in terms of the different areas that we're able to explore and hopefully provide resources and supports for. But at the very beginning, our first thought was kind of thinking, what does this digital era family look like, and what does it mean for um, kids and for parents and today's generation now and in the future? And so a few things come to mind immediately when we think about that. The first is that today's parents are the first to raise children in both the digital and physical worlds simultaneously. While my parents, for example, may have considered that they're raising children in the digital world to a degree because we had a computer in the home, it's very different today. Children have access to technology in ways that we no generation before them did. They have smartphones, personal devices. They use them in schools. They use them everywhere they go. And then, of course, which we'll talk about a little bit later on, the rise of social media really changed what impacts digital technology had. And so, again, thinking of the digital era family, you have kids who were on social media before they were even born because parents created a social media account for them, or parents shared pictures of them in the womb, things like that. Um, all just to I say that all just to draw the comparison of a really stark difference of what digital technology for children in this generation looks like compared to any other generation before that. One really interesting thing that came about that really kind of piqued our interest and piqued kind of our endeavor into family digital wellness was that a lot of teens today, and this has increased since COVID, but a lot of teens today actually indicate that they would prefer not to have social media all the time, access to social media all the time, but only if other kids didn't as well. So because other kids have social media access all the time, teens in particular prefer to have social media access because everyone else does, not because they enjoy it or find such a great benefit from it. And so that's a really interesting kind of baseline to start with when we think of the digital era family. And then we start to think about, well, what are some of the statistics around digital era family and how they are impacted and or use digital technology, especially as it relates to risk factors. And so I won't go through all of these statistics on the screen for you, but a couple that I do want to pull out and highlight for you. The first one being that second bullet point, 70% of kids encounter a sexual or violent content online while doing homework or research. And the reason I point that one out is it may not be super surprising to you on the surface, but if you dig into that, this is while children are doing homework and not actively seeking some type of other content. 70% encounter a sexual or violent content. The other one I want to pull out, which I think is just worth noting again as we talk about the concept of the digital era family and some of the challenges that come with it, is that last bullet point. 66% of US parents say parenting is harder today than it was 20 years ago, many citing that technology is the reason why. And as a parent myself, I could certainly speak to my children are young, but I could speak to the thoughts that you're already having around, well, how much exposure is too much exposure? Are there risks if I put my child's picture on Facebook or on Instagram? What do we do when they get old enough that they could use a tablet and their friends or cousins have tablets, but they don't? How do we have those conversations? Things like that, where it just becomes another layer to parenting that is really unknown, and it's kind of an unbeaten path at this point because there is no right answer. We don't have quite enough data to determine that. We don't quite know what this looks like developmentally over long periods of time. So it really is a challenge, certainly because there's a lot more to consider, but also there's a lot of unknowns that come along with parenting children in the digital era. On top of that, if you think about the COVID-19 pandemic and all of these concerns and some of the statistics that you just saw, the COVID-19 pandemic really became an accelerator for the impact that digital technology has on families, in particular children. There's a survey from Common Sense Media that outlines that children 8 to 12 years old spend an average of 5 hours and 33 minutes a day on screens. Teens between 13 and 18 spend 8.5, almost 9 hours on screens per day. We'll talk about that a little bit more when we get into social media in particular, but that is such a vastly large amount of time and so much more time than was spent prior to COVID. And so COVID took this trend of rising use of technology, digital technology, and really just accelerated it to the point where it's normalized and accessed in so many different environments at all times. And so to give you an idea, we won't, I'll try hard not to go into too much data tonight because I know that that could be hard to consume sometimes. But I do want to point this out. If you look at the increased use of youth media before the pandemic compared to after the pandemic, and I'll just point that graph on the bottom right, the light blue, which is the light blue bar, which is after the which indicates more time spent. That's for all the different types of media uses in which a child may interface with. I want to pull out two of them. One of them being watching videos on a phone, tablet, or computer. 65% said they spend more time doing that since the pandemic. And another one I want to point out is using social media. That's 45% more since the pandemic. And again, when we get into social media in particular, we'll really touch on why that's so important. But these are behaviors that became very, very normalized and still to this point remain normalized. And why that's an issue is because it's replacing other things that are really healthy and really important for child development. Things such as genuine in-person relationships and time with family, in-person social interactions and events, critical thinking, and again, we'll get into more of why social media can but doesn't always promote critical thinking, for example. Imagination. If you think about watching something on your phone or using social media, 9 times out of 10, that's something that is kind of passive. You're consuming it and not putting a lot of effort forward into it, so it doesn't require a lot of imagination. It also replaces or could replace responsibility and structure that may have existed before that increase occurred, as well as a sense of self. And again, we'll talk about what that looks like with social media and development as we move forward. So thinking of social media in particular, and let's transition to that. We sometimes refer to it as being under the influence of the way in which social media impacts children and teens in particular, both in terms of perception as well as the different impacts it might have developmentally. So I want to kind of use an illustration here to talk about why social media is different than other media types. And you may have seen this image here before that you see on the screen where it's kind of like the evolution of media and media use. So newspapers to the radio, the television, to this one has a laptop, but home PCs or PCs in the home. And then there's a really, really stark difference when you switch over to social media and personal devices. And those two things kind of came together around the same time, that 2009 to 2012 era. And there really is a difference with social media compared to these other media types that have come before it, and the use of personal devices as opposed to even a PC, which is a personal computer being in the home, was still a shared device typically. It wasn't something that you had on you at all times and access to at all times and that you went to bed with and things like that. So one of the things to talk about when we think of social media and how this sets up the digital era family is it's very different from television. Television was something that was typically done with siblings or with parents and family together, everybody around the TV watching it. Television also, had finite information, a finite number of channels, a finite options depending on your local area, and it did not give you the personalization that social media and personal devices. TV and television in particular, and that includes movies and things of that nature, also told stories. It was something that you could follow along with. There was a beginning and an end of a TV show or a movie. It was something that was informational and story based, as opposed to, again, social media in particular on personal devices, but social media being snippets, 5 seconds, 10 seconds, 140 characters, whatever it may be, really small snippets of information, oftentimes out of context or with very little context, um, giving no real media nutrition in terms of information that's needed to form a story or form something that has a beginning and end, or that's even useful. So really big, really stark difference between other types of media and social media in that sense. Another thing is time and access. You know, a TV show again had a beginning and an end. A movie had a beginning and an end. A newspaper or a podcast has a story that has a beginning and an end. Social media at this point is endless. You could scroll for days and days and days if you're up for it. You also have nonstop access to it and nonstop access to information that continues to feed you. So, again, TV or a podcast or a radio, you have to go and seek that out to some degree. Social media comes to you by way of notifications, comes to you by way of updates, comes to you by way of refreshing your story and seeing new information, other people updating and posting. There's constantly new information that's accessible. Something else we have to think about is opportunity costs when it comes to social media. So again, because television and because radio, oftentimes and newspapers have a beginning and an end, the time spent utilizing those things, especially because they're usually stationary, you can't bring them with you absolutely everywhere you go, like you can a personal device. Um, if you think about teens spending almost 9 hours a day on social media, what could they be doing with that 9 hours, or what were they doing with that 9 hours before social media? Certainly, things that we talked about, building relationships, social, in-person social interactions, things that force them to think creatively or with their imagination. The opportunity cost is essentially unmeasured because there's so much that can be done with the time that is spent on social media. So the impact is really detrimental in that sense of taking away opportunity cost. Additionally, we have content control. As I mentioned, there's only a finite number of things you can watch on TV or hear on the radio or read in the newspaper. Social media really allows you to find any type of content that you're looking for, and probably a lot of content that you're not looking for. So content control becomes really unheard of when it comes to that, when it comes to social media platforms. And then again, reality versus perception, because it's not um, filtered in the sense of having a beginning and an end, because it's taken out of context or provides very little context. Social media content really can change your perception of self, perception of others, perception of your surroundings, because it's not typically based in reality. You're only seeing that snippet. But you're seeing that snippet time and time again with unlimited access and um, unlimited ability to find more of that if you're trying to justify a perception that you have. So it really becomes much more, leans much more on the side of perception versus reality, which certainly could have negative impacts as well. So that brings us to thinking through, well, what are some of the common digital dangers that exist for the digital era family? Knowing what we know about social media, and I just want to emphasize that we typically define digital technology pretty widely to involve a lot of things. What I'm going through in the next few slides here and talking about common digital dangers, we're going to talk about through the context of social media and the use of social media for children and teens. Um, but let's talk about what currently exists as the established common digital dangers for the digital era family. The first one, and these are in no particular order in terms of most prevalent or not, but the first one being online sexual content. I'm sure I don't have to explain to you. You can find online sexual content in so many ways in so many places on social media. And it's very, very hard to actually steer away from that if you're trying to, because it's so widely normalized and accessible on social media platforms. Digital predators, another one that I think comes to mind pretty quickly for people when they think about children being safe online or what are some of the dangers. Online violence, which has increased quite a bit over the years, especially since the pandemic. Mental health, again, going back to that perception versus reality, mental health being a real digital danger as it relates to the social media impact on children. Especially, we're not going to go deep into mental health um, details, but especially for young girls, so young teenage girls in particular, very very impactful. Social media is very impactful on their mental health and mental well-being. And then digital trends, which again, we won't touch on this too much, but digital trends being something that helps to normalize and make make behaviors become very viral very quickly, which all has an impact on the different ways in which social media can affect an individual, especially children. So let's briefly talk through each of these, and then we'll do a deeper dive into online abuse and sexual abuse. But online sexual content can be, this is not an exhaustive list, can be anything from child sexual abuse material, self-generated sexual abuse material, sexting or nudes, and especially when those types of things get spread very quickly, again, kind of in that viral manner. Sexualized content. So even if we're not talking about nudity in particular or full nudity, but content that's very sexualized, advertisements that are very sexualized, even platforms that are very sexualized, all fall under this category of online sexual content, which again is very easy to find, very simple to stumble upon, and not a lot of roadblocks or a lot of challenges that are put up to avoid this type of content on social media platforms. The next one is digital predators. Again, this one being the one that probably comes to mind for most people, or at least most adults. But this includes everything from online grooming, whether it be in chat rooms or on gaming platforms or social media chats, online child exploitation, so exploiting a child, whether it be something embarrassing or it be imagery that doesn't want to be out there, blackmailing, sextortion, so nude photos or even to some degree conversations that involve sexual content being exploited to blackmail a child into something, and child trafficking, which is obviously another one that is a big trend and a big type of concern that keeps arising to the surface when we talk about social media and trying to contain some of those risks of digital technology. Online violence. So again, everything from cyberbullying to or advertisements that are really violent, gender-based bias. So for example, a lot of violence against women in particular seems to circulate quite a bit on social media. Bodily harm, everything from promoting it to um, demonstrating it and demonstrating how to produce bodily harm, encouragement of bodily harm, all these things that happen in forums and on platforms that uh, give give those who are encouraging it anonymity and kind of a barrier between them and the next person because they're behind the screen or behind some platform or screen name, things like that. So online violence being something that really incites people and gets people hooked in a way that you might not think on the surface that you would, but online violence really engages people in a way that they don't expect or suspect that it would. Mental health, so again, not an exhaustive list by any means, but anxiety, depression, bodily dissatisfaction, suicide, again, these things being the mental health concerns a higher rate for teenage girls, but also just since the pandemic, we've certainly seen a spike of almost doubling for both boys and girls in the teens around the mental health area. So historically speaking, while boys were always less likely to have depression or anxiety than girls, their rate since the pandemic for boys has also doubled as well. So it's still not as high as girls, but it's doubled just like it's more than doubled. So again, mental health concerns being a very big danger that we highlight as it relates to common digital. And then digital trends. Again, we won't go into a lot of specifics around what digital trends look like, but one of the things to note here is that there's a lot of things that can fall under digital trends. So everything from online challenges, which I'll give you an example of a good digital trend, the ice bucket challenge that happened, 5 or so years ago. That was for a good cause, but it was an online challenge that became a digital trend. Local to national acts. So these are things that maybe start locally, whether it be in a school or in a certain community, and they catch on very quickly, and all of a sudden it becomes a national act. Something like the blackout challenge, for example, is an example of that, where it started in schools and then it really became a national thing very quickly, almost overnight. Food related experiments, so trying to chug a gallon of milk, or the cinnamon challenge of trying to eat a tablespoon of cinnamon, things like that, which again on the surface sometimes seem uh, negligible, or don't seem negligible, and seem very minor and not harmful in any way, but in the end sometimes turns out to be a harmful result. And that's also not mentioning some of the scarier things, like I mentioned, the blackout challenge, where um, that is something that's really dangerous and could really end up to be fatal. But people are doing it because it's a challenge. And then self-harm behaviors, again, cutting, different things that are related to harming your body, being either provoked or put in a gamified or challenging manner, which gets people engaged and gets them trying to do it in a way that they think is harmless, but really could result in negative consequences. So these are the common digital dangers that are currently established, currently exist in terms of the biggest or most common, I should say, threats to children of all ages, but particularly in the teenage years, most often. So, thinking of what we discussed as it relates to common digital dangers through the lens of social media, and kind of what the digital era family looks like and what they're experiencing as it relates to digital technology and in particular social media. I want to take a moment, especially um, as we're working with Adams County CAC, to look at online sexual violence and abuse, and what, just at a high level, what some of this looks like, and how these common digital dangers that we just went through, how they're all connected. They're not really done in a vacuum. They're not really viewed in a vacuum. They all have an interconnection with one another. And so I thought we could look at online sexual violence and abuse as an example. So as you see here up on the screen, looking at online predators, there's over 500,000 of them active each day on social media platforms. And again, those are estimations. I'm confident and willing to say that there's more than that because it's really hard to determine some of the red flags of a predator before something occurs. Children between ages 12 and 15 are in particular especially susceptible to being groomed or manipulated by adults in the online forum. An estimated, and this is just a shocking statistic, but an estimated 89% of sexual advances directed at children occur in internet chat rooms or through instant messaging. Keep in mind that instant messaging can be through Snapchat, Instagram, Facebook, any even you probably not YouTube, but any of those platforms that have a chat feature as opposed to just a comments feature. I also want to make mention this includes gaming as well. So if you're playing on Xbox Live or on PlayStation Online, these all have chat features where groomers certainly go in and try to identify children in which they may make a sexual advance towards. So almost 90% of those advances are happening in some sort of online forum, particularly through a social media platform. The volume of child sexual abuse material, so that C-SPAM that we mentioned earlier, uh, the volume of those reports are analyzed by NCMEC, which is the National Center of Missing and Exploited Children. That has increased 87% since 2019. And that's not because they've changed necessarily what criteria they identify as being analyzed reports. It's because there's been an increase in child sexual abuse material uh, being seen, being accessed, being identified online. And all of that material then gets sent to NCMEC and is analyzed for their purposes as well. So it just gives you a really good example of how this has just exploded since 2019 and certainly since the pandemic. And then this last statistics kind of harkening back to what we identified very early on as it relates to the digital era family. This last statistics, 58% of parents report being concerned about the threats that strangers pose online. Now, that's a very general topic, or I'm sorry, very general statement. When you think of the threats that are online, what I want to point out here is 58%. You might say that's a little more than half, maybe 6 out of 10 parents, which was more than a majority. But what about those other 40%, for example? I would offer to say, just from personal experience as well as my experience in this role, that a lot of parents don't fully understand all of the types of threats that exist, um, and they themselves may be very engaged online and therefore have maybe normalized their ability to filter out some threats or stay away from things that could cause threats, um, and maybe not recognize that children are a little bit more susceptible, or that such threats exist out there where their children may be accessing information, especially again through social media. Keeping in mind, children are going to always the social media platforms are always geared towards engaging children because they're the longest user, in terms of lifespan that platform could have. And they're the most susceptible to some of the manipulations of social media. So you have to remember that children are always going to be a little bit more keen and aware of social media, the newer social media platforms and newer technologies, because this stuff is purposefully geared towards them. And they're also the ones using their phones and their devices more often than adults. So that's part of what I would assume or guess in terms of that other 40% of parents who just aren't fully aware of the scope of some of the threats that may exist or that their children may be exposed to. So looking at social media and online abuse, why does social media in particular have such an impact on this topic of online abuse in particular? Social media access, which children have almost unlimited of at this point, can increase a child's risk of experiencing sexual violence or sexual content or online sexual content. The anonymity and pseudonyms of digital groomers, again, fake profiles, pretending to be one person and really being another, really opens up the ability for a predator to not just communicate with the child, but really learn a lot about the child before they even make any type of contact with them. Social media contains so much of our information and so much of our day-to-day lives without us even realizing it. We're giving someone who we may have never heard of, never seen, never met, never contacted, giving them so much insight into what we don't like, what we prefer, don't prefer, what's going on in our lives, things like that. And again, children in particular are doing that at unprecedented rates as it relates to social media. So predators not only have access to communicate with them, but they have access to information that is really more than any stranger in real life might know about. And then isolating and targeting a victim is way easier to do online than the physical real world. Being able to target the victim because of all the information they have, being able to kind of get a sense and feel for their patterns online, and then using that information to talk directly to that child, not in a setting where other people are, use information against them, or perhaps even use information that engages them or entices them, is far, far easier to do um, on social media and through social media platforms than it is in the real world. And so, because of this, this gives uh, the dangers that exist far more reach and grasp that just doesn't exist quite the same in the real world. And we'll get into a little bit more of the emerging trends that are coming about now, which really identify and demonstrate some of these things even. So again, I mentioned all of these dangers that currently are established as common digital dangers. How are they all connected? So let's look at that online abuse example. So for one, online sexual content is normalized. We see it in advertisements. We see people posting sexualized content, using sexualized language on social media platforms. And again, even if you're not looking for it, having sexual advances or stumbling upon sexualized content or it being shared with you directly, even if you're not asking for it, all is part of that process of normalizing online sexual content for children and teens. Digital predators know this again. They have, as we just discussed, multiple avenues in which they could access children, and what, like I mentioned, what they should or could or need to know about a child in order to provide, or I should not say provide, but in order to engage them in a way that makes the child feel comfortable. Digital predators use cyberbullying techniques and threats. So if a child is not engaged in a way that is um, working with the predator, they know all the ways in which they could cyberbully or threaten a teen or a child who is especially susceptible. Uh, as you would expect, these behaviors cause anxiety, stress, depression, all of these things for children, uh, all of the things that quickly lead to um, these behaviors of being extorted or exploited, giving in to blackmail requests, doing things that you may not otherwise do. Children, again, highly susceptible to this. And then it also becomes a trend, thinking of the digital trends, to perpetuate someone's situation, even if you don't mean to do it or think there's no harm. So, for example, it's become so normalized to share a photo or share an embarrassing thing about someone else, especially in the school settings for teens, that when someone receives it, even if they didn't ask for it, they'll still share it out. It may be an embarrassing or explicit photo. It may be, something that happened to an individual, and it's first tweeted, then it's put on Facebook and Instagram, and it just goes viral because everybody shares it, even if they're not intentionally doing it um, to be harmful. They just have become normalized that doing these types of things is a trend. It's part of what keeps you in the know, part of what keeps you in the digital conversation. And so I really think it's important to note that piece there, that this happens in a way in which all of these dangers have become interconnected and aligned with each other. It's not just everything happening in a vacuum. As I noted, we talk about some of the emerging digital dangers that exist as well, especially around abuse. And I just want to highlight these because it's always important when we're talking about this space of digital wellness to not only have a good concrete understanding of what's currently a concern or a risk, but also to really understand what's coming, looking kind of behind your shoulder of what's coming up on the horizon. So one of the most common ones right now being financial sexual extortion. A good example of this, it happens mostly to teenage boys. Somebody will make a fake account. They will um, pretend to be, a girl or a woman, and wanting to have or having interest in that boy or and wanting to share or exchange, I should say, sexual photos and images. And so when the boy finally exchanges a sexual image, then the person will come out and, essentially blackmail them. If you don't send me X amount of dollars, I'll be sharing this with everybody you know. And so they're extorted financially for money because of these sexual images. Again, this happens more often than not to boys, but certainly happens to girls as well. And it's really something to be aware of because it's not something you stumble upon as much as somebody coming at that child, trying to manipulate them and confuse them. AI generated sexual abuse imagery. So with the rise of AI, and I know we've all heard about AI and just um, how it has really become a commonplace now and a common practice. Um, AI generates images. Any image you want it to generate, it can pretty much generate, and that includes sexual abuse images. It could take somebody's face and put it on a body that's not theirs, and it becomes imagery that again can be shared and become viral. So this is something that is more and more is happening more and more and is on the rise because of the rise of AI generated tools and technology. And then abuse via extended reality, or another way to think of extended reality is virtual reality. But extended reality takes virtual reality and kind of puts it in that online or social media platform where you can interact with other people. And so, you see the image there with the person with the goggles on or the headset on, where you're in this whole virtual reality space and but you're interacting with someone on the other end. And they, maybe are saying things to you that kind of bleeds into the line of abuse or encourages things from you, or they may even, depending on the type of technology, be able to um, expose you to abuse that you weren't looking for or weren't asking for. So we're really entering a whole new era, a whole new type of technology when it comes to um, the risk factors and the dangers that children could be exposed to through technology. Um, and something we really have to be aware of every time we think of or introduce or become exposed to new technology in this era. And so I know what a lot of you are thinking is, well, okay, maybe that's all worst case scenario. There's a lot of good that comes with technology. And I completely agree. Technology definitely has a duality to it, especially around media and social media. There's connections that you can have online that you couldn't have otherwise without technology. Video games can provide education, they can provide an escape, they can provide even a community as long as it's healthy and one that is beneficial or positive. Movies and TV can educate. Mobile devices can really, what we all have in our pocket in terms of a phone is really something that could help or does benefit us in so many ways. Um, but again, it could distract us. TV can provide advertisements um, that we may not want our children exposed to. Video games can provide communities that are not good or that are harmful to our child. And online connections, I think we just went through all of the different ways online connections can really be harmful as well. Um, so there is a duality, and there is something to be said for the benefits of technology. It really comes down to not being necessarily the device, and I would also say not even the platform, such as the social media platforms, but how you value it and how you use it, what your relationship, in other words, is with that technology. That really determines what side of the aisle you fall on as it relates to um, being exposed or having risk factors for digital danger. And so that, in a long, uh, kind of roundabout way, brings us to family digital wellness and really what that means, what we're trying to get at here. And so, we started with taking the idea of digital wellness, which was which we found and was created by the Boston Children's Hospital Digital Wellness Lab. That being an intentional state of physical, mental, social health that occurs with mindful engagement with the digital and natural environment. And that's talking about digital for children, for adults, for families, and the way in which they interact with technology. We took that approach and paired it up with what it means to strengthen families, to protect children from abuse, and to put that all through the lens of the digital era and the digital era family. And that's where we came up with family digital wellness, which is defined as an inclusive, supportive, and preventative approach aimed to strengthen families in raising safe and healthy children in today's digital era. And so that's where the family digital wellness, that's really the foundation of the family digital wellness initiative and program. And everything that we've built from it comes from that working definition there. And so how do we get there, and what does it mean? It certainly doesn't mean that we should just avoid all technology, um, and try to shelter our child from every possible use case of technology. It really becomes a balancing act. There's no denying that technology is a critical, important part of our everyday lives. What we maybe said was that used to be the case for adults and not as much for children. And I think it's fair to say, children use technology in school. They use it at home. They use it to do homework, to do things that interest them, such as hobbies. They also, if they go blindly without ever using and becoming familiar with technology, they may be a little bit at a disadvantage when it comes to being exposed to it kind of out of nowhere. So it's a balancing act of the risk that comes with technology, um, figuring out how to put safeguards in place, and then reaching that point of wellness, which is what we're going to get into here in just a moment. And we kind of look at it at these three phases. The family digital wellness really is somewhat of a spectrum or a continuum. Digital risk means you, and by you, we're talking about the family unit as a whole, so adults and children, really being unaware and unfamiliar of what risks exist, what some of the trends are, what some of the things that could be put in place for safeguarding are, and really don't have any handle on any of those areas of digital technology. Digital safety is being aware. So whether it be that you've heard of things or you're just aware from your own personal use, and you're actively developing ways to put safeguards in place or to think about what safeguards may need to be in place. Digital wellness is where you are engaged, you're fully engaged, and you're also proactive. So you're not waiting for something to happen, you're trying to prevent it from happening. You are building capacity for prevention as opposed to just trying to put, for example, parental settings, right? That's putting something in place, but that's not being proactive to build capacity for identifying when something's a risk and not engaging with it. And that's really what digital wellness is when we talk about it. So digital wellness, we like to say with our digital wellness framework, digital wellness requires digital diligence. It's not something that you do as a once and done. It's not something that's a one size fits all per se. It's something that requires ongoing effort, ongoing intentionality, ongoing diligence to maintain the status of kind of digital wellness on that spectrum of family digital wellness. And so we at Pennsylvania Family Support Alliance tried to figure out what's the best way we could put something in place that is a framework, but not a one size fits all for parents and caregivers and families who are struggling with digital technology or just want to be proactive. And so what we put in place was the Family Digital Wellness Framework, which we sometimes call the 5 Ps, and they are as follows. So the first step, regardless of where you're at in your journey, the first step is to pause and become really aware of what digital dangers exist that are threatening children and families right now. Because what exists right now will not be the same in the future and will not be the same as was in the past. So really pausing to become aware of what those current digital dangers are, and what that means as it relates to your children and your family based on age, exposure, technology use, things like that. Prioritize your family's most urgent needs related to those digital threats and related to safety. So, are you highly exposed to some of those digital threats? Are you highly exposed but have a lot of safeguards in place? Are you building capacity around those digital threats? What is it that you are doing or not doing that needs to become a priority as it relates to the current digital dangers that exist? And again, this is for you as an adult as well as for your children. And how are your children involved? That's an important key piece of this framework. Next is, once you prioritizing, actively taking steps to protect against current digital threats. You know what the digital threats are, you know what the main priority is for you. What are you doing? If it's that you don't have parental settings in place, you're putting those parental settings in place. If it's that you have no idea what social media accounts your child has, it's really getting an understanding of that, and being proactive to understand what settings those social media accounts have or don't have, and implementing those settings. It's also engaging the children, the adults and children engaging with each other, and really implementing a plan, a safety plan for when something does occur. It's not to say something necessarily will, and it's not to say that you can always plan for every type of threat that might exist, but do you know what you're going to do if, instance A, B, or C happens? Does your child know what to do if instance A, B, or C happens? What are you putting in your family digital safety plan to help you and your child be on the same page as it relates to protecting each other against threats that exist? And then once you have that in place and once you're actively working on that, that's where things shift to prevention. Because once you're building a family digital safety plan, once you're actively aware and engaging with what threats exist, what safeguards are in place, you're beginning to build capacity for yourself and for your child and for your family around future threats that may come out. While you may not be able to say this is the next big threat that will happen, having the capacity and the experience around safeguarding and protecting against what threats exist now help kind of build some of those skills for future threats as well. It becomes routine, it becomes part of your nature and your habit, and it also changes the relationship and perception you have with digital technology. And then finally, practicing these things over and over again. So it's not enough to put things in place. It's not enough to just put a family digital wellness plan in place, or family digital safety plan in place. It's not enough to think that at any point, okay, we're done. It's an ongoing process that has to be practiced over and over and over again. As things change, you have to pause and become aware of them again. As children grow older, as threats evolve, you have to prioritize what's most important. How you protect them now will look different versus how you protect them in the future. It's an ongoing cycle that's really critical, which is a really critical piece to this framework and this working for families, regardless of where they're at in their digital wellness journey. In addition to what families can do, I think it's really imperative that we think about what professionals and communities can do. Professionals who are working with families, whether directly or not, are also helping them work through some of the challenges that may exist in the digital technology arena. So, building a foundation or a starting point for trying to engage families around some of those challenges. Building up resources, even if it's not your own resources, what resources exist out there? Do you know of them? Building capacity to help families address some of these concerns, and a culture around family values as opposed to just what families are seeing or perceiving on social media. These are all part of the coaching process that professionals can begin to implement and make a priority as it relates to assisting and supporting families around family digital wellness. Additionally, this is more longer term, but having the agility, the scope of agility and innovation. So understanding the current landscape, understanding that landscape will change. understanding what works now and understanding how that may or may not work in the future. Building this type of approach and this type of foundation for sustainability, and leaning on other organizations, other resources, other areas and experts that are focused on specific areas of digital wellness for families, so that it's not something that's being done in a silo and you're not starting from scratch, but really trying to build up what is available and make it more widely accessible for families that are in need of those types of resources. And so you have families using the framework, you have professionals who could do some of the coaching, and communities that could build up the resources and capacity to help address some of these issues. None of it works if we're not doing this together. It's a very big task, and a tall glass of water in terms of or a tall task in terms of being able to make something like this work on a large level. But we need to begin normalizing it, and the more places, the more people, the more groups and communities that do that, the more it becomes more attainable and sustainable in the future. So that's really important to keep in mind as we talk about approaches and we talk about what we could do, even at the family level. Talk to other families and help them understand. My child, uh, I don't want them using a individual iPad or a tablet. I don't want them accessing things that I haven't given them permission to. Doing things like that really help to promote and encourage others to join with you in that type of approach. Just to give you an idea, I'll go through some of the resources PFSA has available in a moment, but PFSA has 4 primary areas of focus on this. Research and exploration, we're always trying to understand what some of the research says on child development, in other impacts as well. What are some of the emerging trends that happen? We try to do things just like this presentation here to raise awareness and provide education around this topic. We keep a really good eye on the news and media. So what are some of the trends that are coming out? What's some of the stories that are coming out that help highlight, good or bad, some of the things that will impact parents as it relates to digital technology? And then what are some of the parent tools and community tools that either PFSA has created that are out there and accessible, or somebody else has created that could really be of a benefit to others? We want to make sure we're highlighting that and we're promoting that and making it accessible to others. And those are really the primary areas we focus on to try making sure that both that families, professionals, and communities all have access to something that will help any given family as it relates to digital wellness. Just to give you an idea, and you could go to PFSA's website and click on Family Digital Wellness. You'll be able to find all of these resources that are up there. We have several handouts, and we have 2 guides. One's a parent toolkit, which is completely free and accessible for download online. It's 40 plus pages, and parents can download it online from our website. No cost at all. Same with all of these handouts, they're all available for electronic download. The coaching guide is for professionals who want to work with families on this topic. The coaching guide helps to work alongside the parent toolkit, and gives professionals a way to engage parents around this topic. So these are all accessible on PFSA's website. I highly encourage you to check them out. It's completely free. There's no obligation at all, and really good information in there for parents and caregivers and families. Some media resources and things to check out beyond PFSA. If you're looking for a book, Digital for Good is a great book for parents who really want to understand how we could use digital technology in a way that is good for our children. Technology's Child, it's a lot more research based, but is a really good way of understanding how digital media impacts children at different stages. And then 2 documentaries, The Social Dilemma and Childhood 2.0. Social Dilemma's on Netflix. Childhood 2.0 you could find on YouTube or on Childhood 2.0 website, all free for you to view Childhood 2.0. And it's very eye-opening and gives you a lot to chew on and think about as it relates to the impact that social media has on children. And then NetSmart's Kids, that's where you can find healthy, or I should say positive, and educational information and content for children who want to engage with online content. Um, but you want to be sure that it's safe for them. That's a great resource as well. Some other resources to be aware of are Thorn. Thorn is very research based and focuses on mainly child sexual abuse material online and removing it and helping other organizations and tech companies remove it. Common Sense Media does a lot of research, and a lot of folks are familiar with them. The National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, tons of research. They connect with Thorn and partner with Thorn in many ways to provide research, education, awareness. And then Boston Children's Digital Wellness Lab is also a great source for information as it relates to digital wellness for families. And then finally, always like to make sure folks know how to report child abuse, whether it be, child abuse in Pennsylvania. You could call the child line. You can report it online as well if you need to, but definitely make sure you have that information handy in terms of how to connect and report abuse in Pennsylvania. Also, there's the NCMEC Child Tip Line, or I'm sorry, Cyber Tip Line, which you could report child exploitation, online exploitation, sexual exploitation, things like that through the NCMEC Cyber Tip Line, and they will also assist as it relates to your report and providing assistance. So again, lots of information that we could dive into that would take a lot more time. We could focus in on any one particular area and be here for days. But the goal, hopefully, is to give you information that gives you an insight into why family digital wellness is needed, why it's important that we not just avoid technology, not just try to put up a bunch of safeguards, but how we build capacity for interacting with technology in a safe and healthy way, especially as we look at and examine the impacts that social media has on our children. So with that, I will pause for a moment and open it up and see if there are any questions to be answered.
Justin, we don't have any questions, but nice comments about what a great job you've done, and particularly about the 5 Ps. I think those are very helpful for people. It's an easy way for them to find a starting point to start this conversation with their children and teens. And so thank you so much for being with us tonight. Um, and we appreciate your time and all these great resources that you've shared. Really nice. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for having me. And again, I'll just mention if you go to our website, you could get all of those resources completely free for download if you so wish. So please feel free to do so. We certainly encourage it. Thanks again for the opportunity.
Thank you so much. Good night, everyone.